It's great again to be here with you this evening. It's a great blessing to be worshiping God together. I'm so thankful to be here. I'm thankful that we're going to be able to read the words of God this evening, that He's given us these words that His Son has spoken to study and to learn from and to use to guide our lives. I'm thankful for that. We're going to read some of the things that Jesus said tonight, and I think that if we want to be more like Jesus, which I think we all do, we should probably really make sure we understand what He was saying, don't you think? You know, sometimes I would love to ask Jesus a question. I don't know about you, but there are a lot of times when I have questions in my mind and thoughts, and I would love to ask Jesus those questions. And that's why I'm so fascinated by these questions that Jesus was asked by people. And, you know, so we talked about one last night. We're talking about one tonight, too. This question, who is my neighbor, that was asked to Jesus. Now, does anybody recognize who that guy is up there? That was kind of my first introduction into the idea of a neighborhood or what a neighbor means. Now, neighbor could look a lot different based on who you are. If you live in an apartment, you might know your neighbor a lot better than if you live out in the country, and you might have to drive to your neighbor. But when you think about that question, what do you think of? Who do you think of when you think of your neighbor? Well, immediately I think of the Zamora family. They're the people who live next door to me. I see them every day, and we interact in a certain way. But you know, one of the things about Mr. Rogers' neighborhood that kind of intrigued me is that song. Now, I'm not going to sing that song for you. If you know the song, good job. I'm glad. I'm not going to hurt anybody tonight by singing that song. But some of the questions he asked, I'm sure fly over my head as a 4-year-old when I was watching this, and many others, but now as my daughter watches these things, I hear some of the things he says in that song, and he kind of ends the song by saying, would you be, could you be my neighbor? You know, he kind of had a little better understanding of neighborhood, I think, and trying to let kids understand that, but that's what we're going to talk about tonight. What does it really mean to be a neighbor? And answer this question, who is my neighbor? And there's a guy who asked this question to Jesus in Luke chapter 10, verse 29, and a couple other places as well. In Luke chapter 10, verse 29, it says, but he, willing to justify himself, said unto Jesus, and who is my neighbor? He asked Jesus this question. Now, if you're going to just go by this verse, let's go ahead and look at the red flags here. What's the red flag? He says, willing to justify himself, he asked this question. This question was not being asked of a sincere heart of someone who wanted to learn from Jesus. But Jesus was very capable of turning an insincere question into a strong learning moment in this situation. So who was this guy that was asking this question? We go back a little bit in Luke chapter 10, starting in verse 25. Luke chapter 10, starting in verse 25, it says, and behold, a certain lawyer stood up and tempted him, saying, Master, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? So it says here we have a lawyer seeking to tempt Jesus, and he asked another question. He says, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? Well, that's a familiar question. We talked about another guy yesterday who asked the same question to Jesus. What shall I do to inherit eternal life? These Jews wanted to know, what do we need to do to inherit eternal life? And what did Jesus answer to that? He said unto him, what is written in the law? How readest thou? So this lawyer who he's talking to is not a lawyer in the sense that we understand a lawyer, but this was just someone who was very familiar with the law of Moses and was very familiar with the old law. And I feel like his attitude kind of falls into what we would consider the stereotype of a lawyer still. But he asks this question, and Jesus responds, well, you know what's written in the law. What do you think? You read the law. You interpret the law. What do you think the law says? That law of sin and death that we talked about last night. In verse 27, and he answering said, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and all thy soul, and with all thy strength and with all thy mind, and thy neighbor as thyself. So he quotes some scripture there to Jesus, and Jesus responds in verse 28, and he said unto him, thou hast answered right, this do, and thou shalt live. So this lawyer speaking to Jesus, seeking to tempt him, seeking to draw him out, he starts out by asking the big question, and this was the hot button question for the Jews. The Jews that were holding on to that law of sin and death, they wanted to hear Jesus say something bad. They wanted to hear Jesus say something blasphemous, saying, the law doesn't matter, all you need is me. But what did Jesus say? He says, you know the rules. What does it say? And he quotes these two passages to him. In Deuteronomy chapter 11, verse 13, it shall come to pass, if ye shall hearken diligently unto my commandments, which I command you this day, to love the Lord your God and serve him with all your heart and with all your soul. And Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18, thou shalt not avenge nor bear any grudge against the children of thy people, but thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. I am the Lord. He quotes these things to Jesus. Now, this is right before he asked, who is my neighbor? He was trying to trap Jesus here. It says he tempted him. In the ESV, it says put him to the test, is what that word tempted means. In ASV, it's interpreted as made trial of him. He's trying to trap him here with these questions. He wasn't seeking to learn. But he answers the question in the same way he answered last night. And then the lawyer gives another question there. And he asks the question, and who is my neighbor? If I have to serve my neighbor as myself, well, go ahead, Jesus, tell me who my neighbor is. Who are these people that I have to serve as myself? You know, that's a big question for us, isn't it? If we're supposed to love our neighbor as ourselves, we need to know who that person is, don't we? And I think he was trying to trap him here, but that's an honest question. How do we know who these people are? And Jesus answers with a parable. He answers with a story. And starts that in Luke chapter 10, verse 30. And Jesus answering said, a certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves, which stripped him of his raiment and wounded him and departed, leaving him half dead. Now he talks about this trip. It says down from Jerusalem to Jericho. And I pulled up this map here. I think it's very impactful to understand what he meant by this trip. Now look at that kind of terrain you see there. What kind of trip does that look like? You know, this was a trip that was made on foot. This looks like a trip that would take me a couple months to get ready for, if I was to be honest there. I don't think I could, that's a little beyond couch to 5K territory for me, it looks like. So this was a challenging trip, and this was known to be a very dangerous trip as well. This trip, this is a current day picture, or a relatively current day picture of what that trail looks like. It's very treacherous, and this path was known to be full of caves where thieves would hide in these caves, and they would come out, and as people were traveling on this road, you can see it'd be very easy to be caught. You know, where are you going to run to right there? Who's running anywhere right there? The thief could come out, he could catch you, he could take your things and take advantage of you there. And on this road he's talking about, he mentions this man. And this is just an artist's rendition, and I think that road is preferable to the one we just looked at. But this man who was walking along that road, and as he's there, it says he fell among the thieves, which were known to hide in those caves and hide in those areas. And it said they stripped him of his raiment. He's laying there naked, and they wounded him. They beat him up, and then they just left him there half dead. It doesn't say what they stole from him or what they took or if they got anything. They just said they just beat him up. They took his clothes. They just laid him there, and he's laying there half dead. Now, what a situation. Have you ever been stranded anywhere before? You know, the other day I felt pretty bad for myself because I locked myself out of the church, and I was stuck with my cell phone in my pickup outside the church, and I had to call somebody to help get a key. That was a tough situation for me. I was stranded. You know, that's how we feel sometimes. We get all up in a tizzy about being stranded in something like that. But this guy, he's practically dead, isn't he? He's on this dangerous road. He probably knew it was dangerous, but he's out there alone. He's traveling. He gets beat up. He's laying there naked, wounded, and half dead on the road. But good news, he's not the only one on the road, is he? There's somebody coming along. There's several people coming along. It says, and by chance there came down a certain priest that way. And when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So here's a priest, a good guy, a Jewish priest. He's walking down this road, and by chance he comes down. And when he sees that guy, he just kind of passes on the other side. He says, not my problem today. I'm not going to deal with this. I'm just going to keep on moving on. Have you ever felt that way before when you saw somebody in need? You saw somebody in desperate need of help, and you're like, I cannot take this on today. We're moving on. Let's pretend like we didn't see that. We're just going to walk on the other side of the road, and this guy, he's going to be okay. Somebody else will take care of him. Hopefully somebody else will come along. Well, good news, somebody else came along. And likewise, a Levite, when he was at the place, came and looked on him and passed by on the other side. Another respected Jew here, we have a Levite. And this guy actually takes the time to stop. Instead of just hurrying along and pretending like he didn't see it, this guy stops and he looks upon him. And he sees his needs here. And he says, well, that doesn't look good. He sees this guy who's naked, this guy who's poor, he's hurt, he's alone, he might be dead. I don't know if he's a Jew or not. I don't know anything about this guy, but I know he's got problems, and I don't know him. Maybe he's done something wrong to deserve this. Maybe he got in a fight, and he just lost the fight, and that's why he's here. And maybe I can't really fix his problems. This is just too much for me to handle. He just looks, and this is just me supposing what I would think when I saw this situation. He took the time to stand there and to think about this guy's situation, but when he assesses that in his mind, ultimately he decides, this is not worthy of my time, and he passes along on the side of the road. He decides, this is just not a situation that I want to be involved in after he assesses it. And then it continues to say, but a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion on him. The third person finally decides, this guy, this is someone maybe I need to help. When he looks on this person, he has compassion. In verse 33, it says, but a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion on him, and went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring in oil and wine, and set him on his own beast, and brought him to an inn, and took care of him. And on the morrow, when he departed, he took out 2 pence, and gave them to the host, and said to him, take care of him, and whatsoever thou spendest more, when I come again, I will repay thee. So we see these 3 people that interacted with this guy. First we see the priest, then we see the Levite, and both those guys saw this person in need, and they decided, this is not a situation I want to be involved in. I'm just going to keep moving on. I'm busy. I'm in a hurry. I'm going to keep doing my thing. And then the Samaritan is the one who decides to stop, and I think he definitely goes the extra mile here when we say not only did he bind those wounds and take care of his immediate needs, but he also finds a place for him to go and takes care of his needs for a period of time. Puts him up in a place and says, I'm going to take care of this situation. I'm going to take care of this guy. Now, that's not too crazy for us to think about, is it? We've read this story before. Now, saying this to the Jews was a little bit more entertaining. Whenever they say that the Samaritan is the one that stopped, these Jews would just be like, okay, this is a made-up story. We know this one's not true. We know this can't be true, Jesus. Why would a good Jewish priest and a good Jewish Levi just pass along the way, and then a Samaritan who has nothing to do with God like we do, the Samaritan who is inferior to us in their heritage and their relationship with God, why would he be the one that does this? You're just trying to stir up trouble, Jesus. Maybe Jesus was giving him a little taste of his own medicine. This guy is stirring up trouble, and he shows him something that is disturbing to this Jewish man, this Jewish lawyer. And he says the Samaritan here was the one that stopped. And then Jesus really pounds it home here when he talks about this guy, and we see that he was naked, he was poor, he's hurt alone, he's dead. And the Samaritan says, how can I help? And then Jesus rephrases the question, doesn't he? In verse 36 it says, which now of these 3 thinkest thou was neighbor unto him that fell among the thieves? So he gets around to answering the question. He says, who was my neighbor? And he gives him this scenario. We got 3 guys here. Now, who do you think was his neighbor? Who do you think it was? That's an easy question. Do we really need to ask that question? We know who it was. We know it was the 3rd guy. He was the one. He was the one that neighbored to him that fell among the thieves. He's the one that showed compassion to him. And in verse 37, I'm a little ahead of myself there. In verse 37, he says, and he said, he that showed mercy on him, and Jesus said unto him, go and do thou likewise. And I think it's interesting how Jesus rephrases the question. When you look at a lot of the questions Jesus was asked, he tells a story and then he rephrases the question in the right spirit, doesn't he? So he takes this question, who is my neighbor, from a spirit of trying to justify himself, and he rephrases this in a heart that is turned to God and said, who was his neighbor? Who was neighbor unto him? Who did the right thing? And this guy knew what the answer was. And Jesus said unto him, go thou and do likewise. Go you, Jew, and be like the Samaritan. That's hard to hear. That's hard to hear. But Jesus told him that. Now, it's very hard for a Jew to hear that, and we talked about the respect of persons that they struggled with last night. And there definitely was a respect of persons that the Jews had, and he was trying to tear that down with this. But really, The real question is, how do we respond when we see someone in need? In face of this example, how do we respond? Do we respond like the priest? I just don't care. This is not my problem. This is not my problem. If we look at somebody and we kind of judge them as a bad person, it's really easy to do that, isn't it? It's really easy to see someone struggling and just say, you know what? I don't have time for their drama. I can't help this person. I'm just going to move on. And to make ourselves feel better about it, we do what this priest did. We just pretend like we didn't see it. He just got on the other side of the road. He didn't stop to look. He didn't stop to ask. He didn't stop to seek. He just gets on the other side of the road and pretends that he didn't even see it. Have you ever been guilty of that when you saw somebody in need? I'm just going to pretend like I did not see that. I've been guilty of that. How about the Levite? He actually stopped. He assessed the situation. He looked at him. And then he said, you know what? This is not worthy of my time. And that's hard. It's a hard thing to say. I'm sure he didn't say that in his mind. He's not worthy, but that's what it is. He looks at the needs. He assesses the needs. He assesses his ability to help with those things. And he starts getting those excuses in his mind. He says, you know what? I've got enough going on. I need to get down this road. I don't have time to do this. I don't have the ability to do this. It's just not worthy of my efforts. So often we do that with God's will too, don't we? Whenever we know there's something good that we need to do, there's something that we need to work on in our spiritual life, and we say, you know what, it's just not worthy of my effort right now. I just cannot take this on right now. And we have all kinds of excuses in our minds of why we can't do these good deeds, and we might sit and assess that situation and ultimately decide, I'm just not going to do anything about it. Let's get on the other side of the road and let's keep moving. Have you ever been guilty of that before? Known that you could help and just decided I'm not going to? I've been guilty of that one too. What about the Samaritan? He responded with the attitude, what can I do to help? And it was based out of compassion. He looked on him and had compassion on him. He says, what can I do to help? Whenever we read about Jesus looking out at the masses and seeing all these souls in need of help, it says a lot of times that Jesus had compassion upon them. Jesus had a heart of compassion, and that led to action. And for this Samaritan, even though he didn't know who this guy was, he didn't know anything about it, he saw all these needs that he had, he looked at him with a heart of compassion, and he said, what can I do to help? And he did those things that he could do to help. Where do you find yourself falling in this most of the time whenever you see someone in need? I come up with a lot of reasons why I can't help people. It's not hard to do, is it? I find a lot of reasons. I'm busy enough. I've got my own problems to deal with. I can't take on other people's problems. I don't have enough ability to take care of all this person's issues. I can't do all that. I make all kinds of excuses. But the Samaritan had a different attitude. And that attitude is largely based on the question I ask ourselves. Is this person my neighbor, or can I be a neighbor to this person? It's just a couple words different, but it's a very different attitude. The attitude of this Jew, when he asks the question, he says, okay, well, I have to serve my neighbor, so where's the list? Where's the list of people that I have to serve? Is this person my neighbor? Let's check the list. No, let's move on. The other question, can I be a neighbor to this person? I see this person's needs, I assess those needs, and I see that I can help, and I choose to make this person my neighbor. That's what Jesus wants us to do. He wants us to choose to be a neighbor to this person. He doesn't want us to check our list. Well, if they're not sitting in the pew at my church, then I'm not responsible. Those are my neighbors. If they don't live in the house next door to me, I'm not responsible. If they're not living on my roof, I'm not responsible. He wants us to seek out those who need help, to have that heart of compassion. When we ask ourselves in the first question, in that mindset, we find ourselves just like the priest and the Levite, and that's not pleasing to God. So how can we be a neighbor to our fellow man? I think the way we start is by asking ourselves the right question. In Romans chapter 15, let's start in verse 1. Romans chapter 15, verse 1, it says, When then that are strong ought to bear the infirmities of the weak, and not to please ourselves, let every one of us please his neighbor for his edification. For even Christ pleased not himself, but as it is written, the reproaches of them that reproach thee fell on me. I like how they bring in Christ here. He says, Christ pleased not himself, but he took on the reproaches of others. No, do you think Christ, as he lived his life perfectly, you think he was doing that all for him? You think he was doing that for himself to make himself feel good, or just because he wanted to do those things for his own good? He was doing that for us. Jesus knew that he needed to live the perfect life so that he could go on that cross and die for us and to bring redemption to us. He knew that. And Jesus worked hard, not to please himself, but out of love for us. He worked hard. He served us. He did all these things. And he says the strong ought to bear the infirmities of the weak. A lot of times the reason why we don't choose to do this is because we don't consider ourselves strong. We don't consider ourselves strong enough to take things on. But when we have Jesus, who bears all of our burdens, do you think that you're strong? Do you think you're strong enough to help some people out? Do you think you're strong enough to be able to share the gospel that Jesus can bear those burdens? He says, we that are strong ought to bear the infirmities of the weak, not to please ourselves. And that's the way that Jesus did it. He said, let every one of us please his neighbor for his good to edification. It's all about edification. Service to our neighbors to edify them, to draw them closer to God, to show them the love that Jesus has shown to us. It isn't all about us. It's about showing Christ in our actions. And that doesn't happen unless we develop a heart of compassion. Now, I don't know about you, but this is very hard for me to do. It's a lot easier, I think, now that I have children, to think about people other than myself. I didn't really think I was a very selfish person until I went to school and I had a roommate. And when I went and had a roommate in college, I realized there's a lot of things I do just for me. There's a lot of things that I do my way that this other person, it just doesn't jive with them. And then I moved into a house with 3 guys instead of 1. And then I understand, okay, yeah, there's another one. There's a little bit more selfishness. And then those of you who have been married and you have this significant other, it's much closer than a roommate relationship. And you start taking this person's needs on and you see, okay, yeah, there is some more selfishness there. I need to get rid of some of those things. I need to take on this person's needs and accommodate them. And then you have children, and I think it just ratchets it to the next level. And you realize how selfish you were with just you and your spouse. And you together say, why were we that way? How do we do that? We got to change so much for this child. And now that I got 2 children at one time, let's dial that back up. I don't know. Does it stop? I need to ask the guys to have 4 or 5 kids. I don't know if it stops. But you see, it just dials up and up and up. And we start to develop, I think it's easier for me to develop a heart of compassion because it's able for me to get outside of myself a little bit and see the needs of others. But we cannot be a person that fulfills what Jesus wants us to be without a heart of compassion. We need to develop this heart of compassion for our fellow man. And 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 8, it says, finally, be all of one mind, having compassion one of another. Love as brethren, be pitiful, be courteous, not rendering evil for evil or railing for railing, but contrariwise, blessing, knowing that ye are thereunto called, that ye should inherit a blessing. For he that will love life and see good days, let him refrain his tongue from evil, and let his lips that they speak no guile. Let him eschew evil and do good. Let him seek peace and ensue it. For the eyes of the Lord are over the righteous, and his ears are open unto their prayers. But the face of the Lord is against them that do evil. We have that command to love our neighbor as ourselves. To me, it's a lot easier to think about it as love our neighbor as I love my children sometimes. I know I have plenty of selfishness, and I'm not trying to say that that's not a part of my personality, but it's a lot more visible to me to think about it that way. Or think about your spouse or someone that you love. What do they say there? It says, have compassion one for another, love as brethren, be pitiful, be courteous, not rendering evil for evil, railing for railing. How does it work whenever you try to raise your child and return evil for evil with your child? Every time your child does something mean to you, you just do something mean back to them. How does that work? How about railing for railing? Every time your child rails, you just rail right back at them. How about your relationship with a best friend or your spouse? If you live that way, you're not going to have a good relationship, are you? It's not going to last. There's no love there. When we have love in our relationship for our spouse and love in our relationship for our children, we don't do those things, do we? We show our love by not returning evil for evil, but contrariwise, we offer blessing. He says that's the kind of love that we need to have for our brethren. He says, love as brethren, do these things. For he that will love life and see good days, let him refrain his tongue from evil, and his lips speak no guile. That's easy to say, but harder to do, isn't it? To refrain our lips from spewing out those things that we just want to say sometimes. But if we have a heart of compassion, that includes thinking before we speak, doesn't it? It includes thinking about those things, thinking about what that person would do, put some empathy in there. It says that helps us eschew evil and to do good. We need to develop this heart of compassion so that we can serve our fellow man. But that compassion also needs to lead to action, doesn't it? That compassion doesn't need to be a compassion and we walk by and we say, oh man, look at that poor guy, he's had a hard day. God, please help him, let's go. Sometimes that's how we show our heart of compassion, isn't it? We acknowledge and we maybe empathize and say, yeah, that person's really struggling. I feel so bad that my brother is struggling so bad. But we don't take it to the next step, do we? We don't say, well, what can I do about that? What can I do to help? How can I let that lead to action? In our story, the man didn't just look at him and say, oh, that's too bad. He let it lead to action in his life. In Romans chapter 13, verse 8, it says, owe no man anything but to love one another. For he that loveth another has fulfilled the law. For this, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, thou shalt not covet. And if there be any other commandment, it is briefly comprehended in this saying, namely, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Love worketh no ill to his neighbor, therefore love is the fulfilling of the law. We need to let this compassion lead to action in our lives and service to our fellow man. It says, love thy neighbor as thyself, and this love fulfills the law. You know, when we think about the example of Jesus and we look at these things, has Jesus done those things for you? Whenever Jesus looks at us, does he see us as his neighbor? Well, he sees us as his children, doesn't he? He loves us, and when he looks on us, he has a heart of compassion. He looked at us and he had compassion on mankind, and he made the decision, I'm going to live the perfect life. I'm going to do this for my people. I'm going to love them. That led to his actions. Jesus led perfect actions. It's so hard for us to do these things, though, isn't it? When we see somebody in need. However, we need to become more like Jesus. We need to do these things like Jesus would do them. We need to have that compassion that leads to actions in our lives. It's really easy to think about somebody else being there, but I want you to put yourself there for a minute. Now, don't be too overwhelmed with this picture. There's a beautiful woman with two beautiful children inside her belly there, and there's another person. You can think whatever you think, but I want you to place yourself in that man's situation there. Place yourself there on the side of the road, naked, beaten, abused, in need of help. You see somebody who's poor, helpless, weak, sinful, hopeless, someone who needs help. You know, I think most people, if they saw me in this room, most people, if they saw me laying on the side of the road, they'd probably stop and help, wouldn't they? I think they would. But whenever God looked down on us, he saw someone who was poor. Without God, what riches do we have in this world? Without God, God gives us all good things, doesn't he? When God saw me, he saw someone who could not be justified by his own works. I was hopeless. We talked about that last night. We can't fix it ourselves, can we? I was weak. I was sinful. I've got problems. You've got problems, don't you? We need help. But when God looked on us, did he say, you know what? Not worthy. God didn't say that, did he? Is that the truth? Well, that's the truth. We know it's the truth. We're not worthy of that love. We're not worthy of that compassion. We're not worthy of the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. But God looked on us, and he still made that hard decision, didn't he? He looked at us. He saw that we were poor, helpless, weak. He saw that we needed help, and he made the hard decision to give his only son, his perfect son, to die for us. He made that decision, and he's redeemed us. In Romans chapter 5, starting in verse 16, for when we were yet without strength in due time, Christ died for the ungodly. When did Christ decide to die for us? When we had no strength, when we needed help. Christ died for the ungodly. For scarcely for a righteous man will one die, yet peradventure for a good some would even dare to die. But God commendeth his love towards us, and that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Christ didn't die for us after we already loved him, did he? He died for us when we were still sinners, when we were at our rock bottom, when we needed him the most. Christ died for us. Much more then, being now justified by his blood, we shall be saved from wrath through him, through Jesus. For if when we were enemies, we were reconciled to God by the death of his Son, much more being now reconciled, we shall be saved by his life. And not only so, but we also joy in God through our Lord Jesus Christ, by whom we have now received the atonement. He says not only do we just survive, but he says we live with joy. We live renewed. The guy who was laying on the side of the road, the Samaritan didn't put a little Band-Aid on his elbow and move along the road. I hope you survive here. Maybe give him a little bottle of water or something. He really wanted him to thrive. He took him back. He raised him up. He gave him things to succeed. He went the extra mile to do that. You know, God is not just focused on us surviving, but he wants us to live in joy. He wants us to be renewed. He wants us to share that with other people. He wants to share the joy of Jesus with others, and he's done that for us through Jesus Christ. Whenever I think about that man laying on the side of the road, I start to feel really guilty. I don't know about you, but I think about all the people that I've seen that have needed help. I think about friends that I knew needed the gospel, and I didn't share the gospel with them. Why did I not share the gospel with them? You know, well, maybe it would be a little embarrassing because Levi doesn't know everything he needs to know to share the gospel with this guy, so I guess we just won't do anything. Have you found yourself in that situation? I'm just not going to say anything because maybe I don't know the answer to all the questions. Well, nobody knows the answer to all the questions, but we need to share the gospel with those who need it. Have you ever seen somebody who was just in need of a helping hand and had an excuse or another not to do that? You know, we're called to be better than that. You know, whenever I was in college, I'll share this one story with you here, but when I was in college, there was a guy wandering around the apartment complex. He had a Walmart cart full of a bunch of bags. He had some pillows in there. He had a couple gallons of milk. He had some clothes. And this guy was just wandering around the parking lot of our apartment complex. And, you know, I had just read this passage and done some things. Okay, this is my time to shine here, right? I know what I need to do. I'm going to go ask this guy if he needs some help. And so I go and I ask this guy, do you need some help? And he didn't speak any English. I'm like, okay, well, there's a hindrance, but I'm going to follow this through. I'm going to work for this one. So I find somebody who he's able to talk with. He was from India, and I found another guy from India in our apartment complex, and he kind of helped talk. And he said, well, you know, I actually live here, but all of my roommates are gone. And so I just need a place to stay until they get back this weekend. And so I said, you know what, I'm going to be a good guy here. You're going to sleep in our living room, okay? So he comes, and I didn't give him my bed, but he slept on the couch in our living room. And, you know, he stayed there for a couple of days. And then when the weekend came, there were no friends. There was no guy who he lived with there. He had no home. It was just something that he made up. And so we contacted some people at the school and found a place for him to go. And really it felt like a fail because, you know, okay, I just let this guy stay. We don't have a clue who he is. He's been sleeping in my living room. Who knows what he could have done? He was lying to us about everything. But I wasn't taken advantage of. I was fine. He did fine. And you know, we actually had an opportunity to share the gospel with him later. I didn't share the gospel with him at that time, and I felt a lot of regret. And I thought, you know, I was willing to do all these other things, but I was too embarrassed to try to share the gospel with him, even through another person if we couldn't communicate. But God came through on that. He gave us another opportunity. And this guy, he just showed up at our house all the time. I don't understand. One day I walk in and he's just sitting on the couch one day. Another day he's doing laundry. Another day he's taking a shower. Apparently I made him feel very at home. But he came back and he came back. And we weren't able to share the gospel in a way that he wanted to accept. But one of my roommates who, you know, it was just kind of the only guy that we could find to live in the house, It was really impactful for him to see that the other three of us were willing to do that. And it made him start to ask questions, and he's like, why are you guys doing this? We didn't take a full roommate vote. He did not agree. The other three did. He said, why are you guys doing this? It really opened up the door. He was able to come to church. We were able to do some Bible studies. It was very impactful to him. And the whole point of that story is not that I was a good person, because I had plenty of shortcomings to that. It was a lot of my roommates that were doing that too. But the whole point of that story is, just because we don't see the way that it helps doesn't mean that it doesn't help. I know that's a little hard, that's kind of wordy, but think about that. Just because we don't see that I can change this person's life, just because we don't see that I know how I can take care of his need, doesn't mean that something else won't come of that. Now, God will take care of that, won't he? Whenever we choose the right thing, when we choose to help someone in need, God will provide the increase, won't he? God will provide a path. God will provide a way. He completely mixed that one up for me. I had no clue. I had begged that roommate to study with me the whole time we lived together, and he had no interest until that whole thing went down. I had begged him to do it, and God provided a way. So I want to encourage you tonight, as you think about the opportunities that you've had and the opportunities that have passed. Don't dwell on the ones that have passed, but let's move forward. And when we see somebody that's in need, let's make a decision to help that person however we can. It can be a very small thing, or it can be a very great thing. This weekend, we're thinking about these things a lot, aren't we? Because we're about to do this benefit for a family that is definitely in need, a family that we already have love and compassion for. I don't consider Beth Ann and Robert and Barrett people who I would find laying on the side of a trail in the middle of the mountains. These are people that we know and we love. We have an opportunity to help them. But we have opportunities every day to help people, don't we? And we just need to take that step. We need to have the courage to do the right thing. We need to have the courage to let our compassion lead to action. And it does take courage to do that. We need to let our compassion lead to action. As you consider your heart tonight, have you been doing this in your life? Have you been living out the compassion and the love that Jesus showed to us? If you need prayers for that courage to take the next step, if you need prayers that you could grow a heart of compassion, we'd be happy to pray for you. I prayed for the heart of compassion for a long time. I must be a really terrible person, because it was really hard for me to empathize with people. And I think maybe that's why I have 3 babies sitting in my house now. Maybe God answered that prayer. But you see, we can pray for a heart of compassion, and God can show us. He can give us a reason to have compassion, can't he? We can pray for that tonight. Maybe you don't have salvation. Maybe you know that you need this forgiveness that has been offered. Jesus died on the cross for you. He did it for you. He saw your needs, and he took care of those needs. He let it take to action. He had compassion on you. Don't let that be in vain. He did that for you. Accept that free gift. Accept that. If you're not a child of God, consider your condition. You might be like that person lying on the road, and you just don't realize it. Maybe you haven't come to yet. Maybe you're lying there on the road, and you're just about dead, and you need to accept this helping hand. You need to accept the help that Jesus offers. We need Jesus in our life. We need him to be justified, to be renewed. We need to live Jesus in our life every day. When we see the opportunity to do good, we need to do those good things. If you find yourself in need of prayer, if you find yourself in need of the blood of Jesus tonight, please come forward as we sing the song of invitation.